Without objection, so ordered. And I now recognize Mr. Van Drew for 5 minutes from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have to say, I love the turtle analogy. It's pretty neat. You know, our federal agencies have become emboldened in many ways and in many ways unchecked. Too often, they abuse this power. We've seen it used in ways where we go after political opponents, forcing burdensome regulations on American industry, and pushing partisan politics on behalf of presidents. But it is the practice of in-house adjudication where we have seen the system stray so unbelievably far. It's a world where agencies are the prosecutor, the judge, and the executioner. It's unfair, and I believe it's un-American. The House has already passed legislation that would cut back on the expansion of administrative state by passing the REINS Act and the Separation of Powers Restoration Act. But it's clear there absolutely is more to do about this abuse of power. We simply cannot regulate the agencies back to where they should be. We can't regulate them to good behavior. We need to fundamentally rethink and restructure this framework. Mr. Ault, can you elaborate on how you believe the denial of the Seventh Amendment right to jury trials in administrative adjudications undermines the foundational principles of our legal system?
Thank you, Mr. Van Drew. I think it really goes back to what's going on here is very reminiscent of what you saw in the founding era, which is to say essentially the British Parliament went ahead and shifted authority to another tribunal, a Court of Admiralty, in order to be able to actually handle certain tax and other matters that would traditionally be handled by a court where there would be a right to jury. And they did so in order to prevent that jury right from attaching. This, from the time of Magna Carta forward, has been understood to be a fundamental right to have access to these sorts of civil juries, particularly where you have these kinds of fines, the loss of property, life, liberty, or property potentially attaching. And so what you see actually in these administrative tribunals is painfully similar. We're shifting the adjudication to tribunals where you don't have those rights, where you don't have the opportunity to be heard by a neutral arbiter, and where again, we've seen throughout the course of the hearing today, oftentimes, quite frankly, the adjudicator may be someone who wears the hat of prosecutor on a different day. They may be someone who the prosecutors have had access to their computers. There's not genuine independence. This is not a peer who's being able to determine your rights. And so it creates a fundamentally unfair and non-independent process.
And I agree with you. It is fundamentally unfair, and it is wrong, and it is in no way, nobody should kid themselves. Our founding fathers never, ever envisioned what is happening now with these agencies. It's also a great irony that while an agency has the freedom to take its case to regular court, the agency does, and it can even ask for a jury to decide, the people or businesses they're going after don't get to make that decision. How can that be right? Do you think letting these defendants choose to have their case heard outside the agency's own courtroom could fix this unfairness? And if you do, how might that work? I'll address that to you first, Mr. Ault, but anybody else who would like to answer that question is welcome to as well. So
the answer is the less friction, the better. And the earlier at the process the defendant would be able to remove to an Article III court, that would be a more sufficient remedy. Shy of permitting, sort of requiring these actions to be brought in Article III court to begin with. But my concern in any of this is not putting barriers to the exercise of that right that could actually impair a defendant from being able to exercise it. So long as they're able to do so quickly, I think that would be a huge step in the right direction.
Thank you. Professor?
I agree, and I agree that the earlier at the point in the process, the better to remove. So before a lot of the investigative power has been wielded and a lot of the incentives to force folks into settlement, if they can remove before that point, it'd be a lot more effective.
Well,
I agree with that, but I also agree with what Mr. Alt said earlier, which is that it's better for these things to be brought in a regular court to begin with rather than removal, and these other things are second best alternatives. It's better to just have them in Article III courts to begin with.
I agree with you totally. I want to thank the chairman for having this hearing today. It's something we need to talk about. I know for the average American man and woman, it may seem a little dry or a little boring, but the reality is it's very, very important. It goes to our fundamental rights as Americans, so I appreciate your work. I yield back.